now going to have a look at some of the findings from the research that was commissioned, because one of the great things about the way that Kumba has developed the advanced network, it's that it provides these talk shops and exploration opportunities, but is also wanting to ensure that our work is grounded through research, so that it goes beyond anecdote and that you can actually track the development and you can track the process over time. So we're going to hear from Professor Graham Welch, who holds the Institute of Education, University of London Established Chair of Music Education. He is the immediate past president of the International Society for Music Education and past co-chair of its research commission. He has over 300 publications to his name, covering all aspects of music development, music education, teacher education, and the wider benefits of music. Joining Professor Welch is Beverley Mason, who is inspired by achieving excellence through leadership and diversity. She co-created and co-produced the GAIN Board Programme with Arts and Business, the Power Brokers Cultural Leadership Programme, and the CNBC European Business Leadership Awards with the Financial Times. She's also an assessor to the BBC Performing Arts Fund. We do lay it on with our speakers. Beverley and Graham.
Good. We've got something there. Thank you very much. I'm essentially the warm-up. I'm fulfilling a kind of role which is also, used another metaphor, as a kind of bookend. I'm introducing the actual evaluation of phase one that Beverley has undertaken, and at the same time thinking with Beverley kind of out loud with you what some of the implications actually might be in terms of the next phase. One of the things that we need to consider is the kind of the context. I'm sorry the print's rather small, and I apologise also in advance to Dick Hallam, who's sitting here, that I have the cheek to talk about El Sistema, as he's one of the leading global experts on this. El Sistema is an example of the vitality, the interest that there is in instrumental learning, systematic instrumental learning, which is engaging very large communities around the world. You can see here that the research evaluation was recently conducted by my colleague Andrea Creech, that she discovered and reported on 277 different programs around the world, and these exist in 58 countries. In another report, which was looking at youth orchestras, there are known to be at least 68 countries, for example, that have youth orchestras. There's an enormous amount of activity going on where young people are being engaged in musical learning. Costa Rica has brought in its own system. Costa Ricans are quite funny about this because they say that they gave Venezuela the idea in the first place, and then they imported it back again in 2008. And also the In Harmony program that most of you will know about, which is across the UK, but the main focus has been in England. And the typical approach, as we say on the slide, is for young people to engage in instrumental music learning, but in small groups, then in slightly larger ensembles, as well as in orchestral settings. The challenge is how we actually make sure that this develops and continues through to a more advanced level. Do they actually see role models? The work that's been done in the United States, for example, that some of you will know about, the Sphinx organization, when they first began, they were reporting that only 1.2% of American orchestras, of which there are something like 1,800, 500 youth orchestras, that only 1.2% of those actually had people that were black or Latino. After 10 years of activity, the SIGS organization is very proud to report this has doubled to 2.4%. So that's still pretty small. But at least there are now opportunities in the United States for young people to meet, listen to musicians of color. There are also many opportunities for young people to engage through that organization, over 100,000 at the moment, take part in the musical events that they host each year. So there are models elsewhere in the world that the Advanced Network and colleagues in this room can draw on to give us ideas of how we might take the partnership forward. The sustainment programs that I mentioned there involve many inner city children and, of course, will involve, because of that, many black and minority ethnic children and young people as well. Sitting on this table over here in a striped shirt is Truda White, who is the Chief Executive of the Music in Secondary Schools Trust. This is one of the organizations that's been developing and demonstrating that one can do work with whole school year groups. Truda told me last week that recently they had an event with the National Youth Orchestra that also has a concern about trying to ensure that there is greater representation for black and minority ethnic young people. Now I'm mentioning this, as I said in the warm-up for Beverley, in order that we understand that there is a growing number of young people that actually want to participate, that are participating, that we have the potential to draw on these. We need to make sure that there are progression routes through into more advanced musical learning and performance. That's the challenge. Beverley.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. I'd also like to say a big thank you to all of the people, partners in this room who took part in the research. It's really appreciated, and in particular thanks to Julie and Christina for providing all that wonderful space at the Royal Academy of Music where we could hold various focus groups. So just to talk a little bit about the Advanced Network research, it's been a journey, it's been a long period of time that we've been looking at the kind of issues affecting the sector. But what I'd like to sort of clarify and say is that the research that I've been conducting has investigated the connections between nurturing excellence and effective practices in overcoming barriers that black and ethnic minority communities face in reaching advanced levels of Western European and non-Western European classical music and jazz music making. I mean, there's a theory that that the explicit challenges that young people from BME backgrounds face is different compared to those in their counterparts in the general population. However, through the process of review and analysis, and plus your opinions, we've arrived at a fuller report which really locates evidence of the effective practices that are available to overcome those barriers and help young people to engage in music making and communities into music making in formal and informal practices. In addition, our report looks at a handful of young musicians and a handful of organisations whose models of practice really helps to move things on in a particular way, and it's based on having a particular set of vision and aims for those organisations. I'm just going to step back for a second, and just to give you a tiny bit of statistical information here. What I'd like to say is that the idea of ethnic minorities taking part in music making is something that is really important to have a look at from a statistical point of view. One of the potential barriers is all about early access. In a tailored report I commissioned from the DCMS, which looked at music making in general and not broken down by musical genre, we found that over a 6-year period that black adult population had increased their engagement in making music over a period of time. In the example we have here, we're just looking really at those who played a musical instrument to an audience or rehearsed for a performance compared to the non-BAME population. However, in the second snapshot, we can see, and that's only based on 1 year's data, that BAME children or young musicians seem to be less engaged on all 3 music-making criteria that's covered in the Taking Part survey. So the question is, are BAME young people missing out on early learning or engagement opportunities? What are those reasons? And does that have an impact on how those musicians might progress to advanced skills in the future? So just looking very quickly at the core themes. Today, we've only got a few minutes, so I'm just going to focus on looking at perhaps 2 of the 5 themes that are covered in the focus groups. That's exploring barriers. So it's very good to hear what the sector had to say, what you had to say, and to look at effective practices that supports progression for music making for young musicians. Just looking at those who took part, over a period of time, we conducted a series of focus groups and held individual interviews. And I think what I'd like to say is that it's really great that people in the audience here today and others gave so much generosity of their time. But the most important thing that I want to get across here is the fact that it's those voices that really form the kind of basis for our research. So let's look at some of those barriers, and it's just taking theme 2 to start off with. Whilst investigating the theme of exploring barriers, we discovered there were several iterations of the challenge faced, and in fact there was very specific barriers that were faced by the British, the black and ethnic minority experience, and those could be gathered into 6 areas, which I'm showing here. First of all, there's the system, in other words, the situation, the institution, the protocols, the methods of engagement, and also the traditions of the various genres. Then there's a cultural context. Another specific barrier is diversity in of itself, taking into consideration what difference really means, cultural, religious, faiths and beliefs, as well as social and economic differences. Another key factor that we examined in the focus groups and through the research was the area of individual self-belief. Professional musicians often said they lacked the existence of credible role models, or there might be expectations of a standard that's less of a standard than others might be expected, that they might be expected to achieve. Questions like, are you really a classical musician? Really? Wow. And then parents also face many challenges, but they also experience a sort of series of complex barriers themselves. They battle with the distribution of information, how things are communicated, the channels of information, the system, sometimes signposting or the lack thereof, or receiving things much later in the day than others may receive them. The kind of networks, the relevant networks, places to study, places of accessing music. And also within the home environment, it's possible that among ethnic minorities, perhaps this exists across all demographics. But certainly we found some evidence that with black and ethnic minority communities, sometimes music is not the most desirable first career choice. Parents expect young people to study hard, but they don't always feel that they can get involved in what they're doing. Could be the same for other subjects too, physics, for example, in my case. But the problem is that parents really feel that they don't necessarily have the tools and resources to know how to support that young musician. And then the nutty area of access. I mean, this is a whole wide-ranging area, and everything we perhaps do and say refers back to this, and I think we'll pick this up later on. So let's look at a very few examples of some of the barriers. Then there's a cultural context. A specific barrier is getting to grips with perspectives and context. It's a cold reality that across the non-homogeneous backgrounds that comprise diversity, of BAME, they're at least more or less likely to be exposed to a broad and diverse range of different and other cultural and music art forms, perhaps compared to non-BAME groups. I mean, I know that's a generalization, but the home environment and historical choices in a diverse background, mixed communities, may not be as linear or as focused or as conducive to a focus on a specific genre, whether it be jazz, classical or non-Western European classical music. There's a lot going on and a lot of choices that people can make. As articulated by one of our participants of the focus group, if you've been brought up in a family with Western classical music from the age of 3, it's then more than likely that you're one step ahead. So being one step ahead from early years is something that we perhaps like to explore in the next phase. And once the musician decides to take study to advanced levels, how important has that prior ongoing support from the family been? How important has it been before they can arrive to that next stage, that next level? We seem to be gathering some evidence from BAME home environments and parental engagement that this is very important, immensely important, in the early years and beyond. So supporting diversity in its true sense, and it's exactly what Adam said, it's a fiscal challenge. Individualization costs more time and more resources. However, respondents in our research were keen to say that it's more about the vision and values of that organisation who want to embrace participation engagement with community groups and ethnic minorities. That will be and want to do something fundamentally different is dependent on how those young people get engaged on a music progression journey. Whilst in the case of this quote, the outcome is about making music as a means of community cohesion, the underlying desire was that the Somali community would continue to explore and deepen their faith and spiritualism in an ensemble setting with the support of a national orchestra. There's quite a lot in the research, and I'm going to have to whiz through because we're short of time. But I do want to pick up on this area of institutions as being a specific barrier. This is about how people can crack the system. Many of the organisations with models of effective practices we spoke to were trying to change perceptions and behaviours and to break down barriers and forge sustainable links. And the institutions or the conservatoires or the institutions, music colleges, that are regarded as being praiseworthy destinations along the routes are definitely gifted with a high level, an undeniable level of goodwill. We heard that the respondents feel there's a general shift from serving up the usual fare to traditional audiences to what young people feel that they're capable of doing. And there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of enthusiasm, but often it stops there. It's about how the institutions, the systems, transfer that goodwill into action and try to inspire change. And I won't read through the quote there, but there is this feeling that people who are wanting to make change are reaching a brick wall. Speaking about walls and wall gardens, there's something quite desirable about a secret garden, but it is something that people want to protect. But to quote a leader who is now changing the paradigm and is also the beneficiary of a music education, people need to look now about outside of what's going on and bring people in, and perhaps just try to lower those garden walls. So the question is, what is really accessible? What's inside, and how BAME young musicians and their families get access? I've got lots of stories here, but I really can't spend much more time, and I think we'll be able to have conversations around the table. But I do want to just stop for a minute and just pause for a minute to look at professional musicians' experiences. During the process of investigation, the wide range of musicians and across the generations, a little bit like the two Jameses we heard earlier today, I heard several eye-opening and quite frankly gut-wrenching examples of why ethnic minorities struggle to make their mark in jazz and in classical music. And it's not even about talent or potential. It's about early confidence and self-belief. So many times musicians said that they were made to feel invisible and not being worthy enough to merit the commission or the performance fees. Can you play for beer money? Direct quote. From being the expert player or musician in a certain context to being reduced to being compared to their non-BAME colleagues, and then not being acknowledged, names misspelled, or other sharing the billing. A kind of a series of incidences where people felt that they'd been chipped away at. And in fact, some of the incidents may sound as if they came out of the pre-Lord Scargill era. But I've heard from many musicians in their 20s, as well as many of those with several years behind them. And it's not all negative, by any means. In fact, some of those experiences have made the musicians even more determined to forge their own pathways, to become even more entrepreneurial. But I heard what they said, it's exhausting.
Beverley, you're going to make me fail in one of my key tasks.
I'm going to run through very quickly, just to really sort of summarise effective practices, because there's a wealth of great work out there with many institutions and organisations turning the model on its head and looking to focus on the key elements that really help to support young musicians' journey. Nurturing excellence, creating environments where individuals can grow and thrive, very important. Helping them to aspire and to learn. Communication, completely important. The idea of being able to talk to individuals, to parents, in a way that meets their needs. Choice of repertoire, giving particular attention to the fact that a young musician and their families will come from a certain perspective, and whilst they want to open up their world, you need to make it relevant. Also, building sustainable and forward-looking opportunities is important. So many projects have been one-offs, spasmodic, and not necessarily joined up. So the idea of building and linking up opportunities in these organisations has been great. In terms of taking action, and I'm going to really wrap up now, Hilary.
I'm getting ready to stand up and impose my presence.
In terms of taking action, I clearly won't go through this chart, but this can be available to the whole audience here today. There's some evidence that the research that was conducted 10 years ago, which looked at what were the kind of developmental challenges. They still exist. Role models, support for parents, better support for teachers, equal access to opportunity. Those areas still exist. The bits that are in dark purple are perhaps new areas that we have covered in our research around looking at perhaps providing and supporting networks so that black and ethnic minority musicians can get together and share their experiences, work collaboratively, and have more opportunities to perhaps to make an influence on the main sector itself. I think we'll have to wrap up, aren't I?
I'm afraid so. Graham, did you want to?
Final word.
Just to let colleagues know that the next phase is to continue this work that's already been undertaken. We need to understand far more about what the various stakeholders have to say and what they're experiencing, in order, if we are going to follow up our Arts Council suggestion of actually creating networks, of actually getting people to talk to each other, to have the same script. There is lots of evidence that learning a musical instrument affects not just the moment that you're doing it, but has a lifelong benefit, whether or not you continue to do it. We also have evidence that it's quite possible for whole classes, whole year groups, whole schools to learn. So we need to follow this through, and we certainly need much more systematic data than the sector has tended to gather previously. We know relatively little about the pathways that are on offer and about the experiences that people have. As Beverley says, barriers that have been reported in the UK and elsewhere still exist. We need to be systematic in the way that we address these. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's